Okay, this is the third video in the beginner AutoCAD drafting series that I'm doing. And the last time we kind of just overviewed the essential how do we use commands, kind of how to go through that process, what to look for, but just covering basically the line command in general. We're going to kind of continue on that. We're still just going to basically use lines today. But we're going to go over some of the more common tools of how to manipulate and modify some of those lines. And also, up to this point, I really haven't explained to a large degree what I'm doing as far as moving your mouse around, clicking, things like that. And sometimes that doesn't come through very well in videos and people forget to mention it. So I want to go ahead and discuss that a little bit now. I'm just going to draw a few kind of lines for reference here. And kind of what I'm doing. So this is just a mess and it doesn't mean to be anything. But so I just want to point out a couple key things. If you have a normal, I say a normal mouse, with a left click, right click, and one of the little scroll mouse wheels, then you should be able to do all these functions with just the mouse. But there's a couple things that are pretty much essential to drafting and just moving around in model space. And that's zooming in and out and panning or kind of scrolling over. So you can see based on this object I can zoom out, I can zoom in. Now what I'm doing there is just using the scroll wheel on the mouse. So I scroll backwards and it zooms out, I scroll forwards, it's in. Now I believe in the options you can actually set that to be reverse if that's your preferred style, but that's how I'm doing that. And then say I zoomed over and it's way over here and I want to scoot it over here. Well, I could just zoom out and then try to zoom back in right on it, but it's not always right where I want it to be. So the tool for that is called pan. And so we're gonna, if you push the scroll wheel down, it gives you this little hand, and so you can essentially grab your sheet and scoot it over wherever you would like. Okay, and so that's just the middle mouse wheel. Now these are actually tools and commands in AutoCAD. Now just because they're built into the mouse, you can actually use tools to do this. So if I wanted to pan, you could just type P for pan and it gives you the option to now grab a hand and scoot things around in the exact same way. But then to get out of the command, you either have to hit the escape button or enter. Okay, similarly, we could just type Z for zoom, and now it's given us all these options. So there actually are a few more options as far as using the command zoom. So now we can say, we look here, it says specify a corner of a window or enter a scale factor. So we could actually say how much I want to zoom in relative to where we are right here or relative to some unit system. Or we can just draw a box. So if I want this object mostly centered, I left click and draw a box, and then I left click again to establish the box and it zooms to that exact window. But again, I can just zoom in and out with the scroll wheel. One other thing I would like to point out as far as the zoom options, again, if you just hit Z, now you see it said specify a corner, and that's right next to your crosshairs. But if you come down here to the command line, which again I would encourage you to always do, there's a lot of options. And while each of them has their own unique thing and you can play around with them, the biggest thing I like to use is this one right here, is zoom extents. Because sometimes, for instance, say if I was given a drawing and this is actually what I wanted, but for some reason somebody was just messing with you or whatever, and this is what you were given, you kind of see maybe there's something over here, but if that's all there's in the drawing, I can hit Z for zoom and then now come over here, and if you look in the command line, if you ever see, it gives you all these options. So you can either type out the whole option, you can actually manually click it, or if you see these uppercase bolded or blue letters, you can just hit that specific letter. So in this case, I want to zoom extent, hit E and hit enter, and now it zooms to the full extent of what I have drawn. So let's say, for instance, now I'm going to draw something crazy up here, but if I was zoomed all the way in here, I wouldn't even know that existed. So now if I zoom E for extent, it actually pulls it back to the full extent of any drawn material within your drawing. Okay, so that's a pretty helpful thing. So another thing that may not have come through as far as the mouse functionality is clicking. And I know that seems kind of ridiculous, but when you left click, so say you're inside of a command, if I click here and I left click, it does the next point. Now I have either, to get out of a command, I can either hit escape, I can hit enter, or I can actually right click. Now when I right click, and this will be dependent upon how you set up in your options for right click customization, normally it will give you a full menu. And right here, I just want to hit enter. So again, you could just hit enter. Now, if you're using the same commands over and over and over and over, and you're just doing basic drafting, sometimes, and what I used to do, is I would set my right click to just always enter. It would enter immediately, and then if I hit it again, it would automatically bring up the last command that I used. But I don't use that as much anymore. And so what now, you can right click, it gives you the menu. But then a second right click, say you're not in a command at all, I right click, and now it gives me this full range of options. So you can actually pan or zoom from the right click menu. You can change a lot of these different things. You can bring up all these modifying tools, things that are on the clipboard, isolating objects. But what I really like is normally it'll give you this immediate option to repeat the last command. But also, if you go to recent input, it will give you the list of all the most recent commands. So say there's one, you're going back and forth between two and you can't remember the shortcut, you can just right click and go find them really easily here. So that's kind of helpful. Okay, now the next thing with your mouse is selection. So I draw all these lines. Now you'll notice when I kind of hover over things, they kind of light up a little bit. And they didn't used to do that. That's a fairly new feature, but it's helpful because you can see essentially what you're hovering over. And once if you're trying to select something, it's a good guide for which one you're actually selecting. Okay, so like if I was trying to select something in here, it's really hard to see. Obviously, you should zoom in. But say I want to click on this line and I want to select it. So that's similar to isolating an object, essentially what you're doing. Now I can just hover right over there and click it, and now you see how it highlights it even more in blue, and then it gives you these kind of blue vertices, and these are like grips. We'll talk about that in a further video, I think the next video. But essentially that shows us that we have selected this. Now we can continue to pick objects one at a time. Here, here, here. But how do you unpick? So you can't just re-click and unpick. Now you can hit Shift and reduce that click. So if you hold down Shift, you notice now when we hovered over, I'm holding down Shift right now, and you see there's a little negative symbol or minus symbol over that thing. And if I click it, it takes that out of the selection. So I can actually deselect everything by holding down Shift and selecting it again. Okay. Another way to select is drawing a window. Similar to what we did for zooming, we can draw a window. Now with selection, the windows work two different ways depending on whether you drag it to the left or to the right. So for example, if we come out here and just to show you, I'm left clicking and holding, and you just left click and then into blank empty space, and you see how it's drawing in this window. Now the edges are dashed and the inside it's kind of this green color, but when I go to the right, what happens? The edges are solid line and the window is blue. Now the thing I did a second ago, which I find very unwieldy, sometimes it can be helpful. It's a new feature that when you go, if you hold on to the left click button, you can actually draw a specific shape for which you can select things. Again, it's somewhat unwieldy, but it is there. So let me show you how this works. So say I want to select this line. So I can either click it like I just did. If I click around it, just go to the left, just any part of this line that is touched by my selection box, if I'm dragging to the left, it will select it. So I don't have to click the whole thing. Any point on that line will select the object. Contrarily, if you drag to the right and you have this blue with the solid line, you see how it's not wanting to select it. If you do it this way, you have to get the entire object within the window before it selects. But where that is helpful is, say there's smaller features within here and it's hard to work around everything. So if I was just trying to pick this line, you can easily accidentally pick other things. But if I said I'm going to start here and encompass this whole line, but it doesn't encompass any other line, I can select that specific line within there. Okay, and again, if you're wanting to kind of do a little bit more, you can drag, and then now this will only select certain things within this box for a various shape. It's not as useful, but sometimes if you really have to get into somewhere, it can be useful. So that's kind of the basic zoom and selection features. So that's what you're seeing kind of in the background when I'm just kind of zooming in and out, scooting over, picking things. Okay, so you'll probably see me do that a lot, but now you kind of have a basic understanding of how that works. So we're going to move on now to some of the more common tools that we use pretty much all the time. And so I'm just going to get rid of this stuff. Again, I could just select the whole thing and I just hit delete. So I'm just going to draw a line, just a random line here. And now there are all different kinds of things we can modify with this line. And you see them up here in the modify. Again, we're on the home tab, and this is kind of the modify toolbar within that. One of the biggest things is, say we want to move it. And let me just draw another line here for reference, so you can kind of see it's not just blank space. So say that line shouldn't be there, we want it over here. So there's actually two ways to do this now. The older way, if you just hit M for move, or you can type move, but you have to be careful with that because there's other commands that use MO or things like that. So just M for move, and you hit OK, and now you have a little pick box. Your full crosshair has gone away, and now you're at just a little selection box. And so this is common with a lot of these other commands within here. So now if you see, it tells me right next to my pick box, but also in the command line it says select objects. So I hover over there, select it. Now again, I could use the different selection processes, same as before, but I'm just going to click it. Now what? So you see there's nothing else for it to do. So when you're within a command, sometimes there are multiple steps. So to cycle to the next step, we're going to either hit enter or right click. We hit enter, and now it says specify base point or displacement. We're just going to say base point. So we want to move this over here. So we told it what object we wanted it to move, and now we need to show it kind of how to move it. So if we're just moving in general, we can click anywhere. So essentially this is where we're just going to pick up the object from. That may not be the best analogy, but let's just say we did it close, right here. And from this point, now we can move our object over. But do you see how the object is moving relative to the location that we selected it? So it stays the same relative to that location, and then now we can set it here. So to represent that again, we click it, I can right click and say my base point was way over here. It doesn't really matter because we're just kind of picking it up, but you see it keeps the same distance away from the point I picked. We'll talk about in the next video how to do this more precisely, because as you notice, if we just hit move, we click our object and we can zoom in, but I want it to be maybe right here, but it's hard to decide. Maybe that's the exact end point, but it's really hard to tell, and I want to move it right here. That's really, now it's close, but if you keep zooming in, it's not as close as you think it is. So in the next video, we'll cover snapping and grip edits and things, so you can actually see there is a way to snap it exactly, or put that endpoint exactly on the end of this other line. So another quick way to move, which sometimes is easier and sometimes is more of a pain, and this is kind of only for newer versions. I'm not sure when they started doing this in the last few years. But if you just select the line, we're not even in the move command, and you just come back over here and click and hold on the line, you can actually pick it up and drag it around. So if you just but you have to click and then go back in and re-click and hold to move this around. But again, that's one of the newer ways with which you can move objects around. Okay, so moving obviously is a thing you're going to do all the time. And again, you could just come up here and click the move button. But again, it's one of these, a lot of these commands that I'm trying to teach you and we'll cover in this series. The command line, there's a keyboard shortcut that is so simple, it's just much easier to just hit M, enter, and go than trying to always remember where things are up here. Similarly, just L for line, M for move. And probably I'll post a link or have a cheat sheet kind of that will have a lot of these commands built in eventually. So we can move objects around, but what if I wanted two of these lines? So I could just draw another line similar to that. That looks pretty much the same. But what if I needed it to be the exact copy of this, an exact replica? Well, that obviously up here we have a copy command. So we can either click here, which I'll do here, and we'll just work through this. So again, it's a very similar process. If you look at your command line, here we just select our object. Now it does say objects, so we could click multiple objects. So we could click both of these. And then I'll right click or hit enter, and then again it's specified displacement or base point. So I'm going to click here, and now it copies both of those objects over here. But the good thing about copying is it'll keep copying them however many times you want if you just keep clicking until you get out of the command. Okay, so I can either hit enter or escape or right click to get out of there. So you see I've copied this all over the place. And so you can pick one thing at a time, you can pick multiple things, and it works exactly the same way as the move command. You select your objects, you specify a displacement point, and you can move them around. The one difference is obviously you can't move something more than once, whereas you can copy things multiple times. Okay, so let me erase these. So move and copy are really common tools. So let me just erase this. So I'm going to draw a line, and I want it to be perfectly flat. So what I'm going to do is hit the F8, turn on my orthogonal or ortho, and I can draw a line perfectly smooth. And so let's just say I want this line to be, we'll zoom in a bit, I want it to be 50 feet or just 50 units long. Now if you notice, I had zoomed in too far. When I went to make that line, it shot it outward, but all I needed to do is zoom out. Okay, so now I have a line that I said it was 50 units long. What if, say for the sake of argument, I want to make a road or something, but I want this exact same line directly, perfectly parallel to it, but 10 feet away. So I could copy it, that could be one way, and I could say, well, I want a base point here, and I could even say how far I want that base point to be, and type 10, and I could get close. But again, if I'm not clicking this exact point, I'm not 100% sure where it's going. Now in ortho mode, it should put it exactly 10 away in parallel. But an easier way to do that is with the offset command. So we can just type O for offset, or it's also, I believe it's this one, yep, up here. So now this one, you notice it doesn't give us a pick box right away. Even though I want to offset this line, it's not letting me click that, because this is, again, you have to keep an eye on your command line, because what is it asking you to do now? You specify the offset distance. Now there's other options here, but we just want to tell it the distance. So again, we're just going to say 10. Now it'll ask you, well, now that you told me how far you want it to offset, tell me what you want to offset. So we're going to click this line, and again, now it only gives you the option to click one thing. There's no, you click it, you don't have to hit enter the same way you did with move or copy command. It just automatically is ready to go. But the only other option here is telling it what side to do it on. Okay, so I can do it on top as I did before, I can do it on bottom. Okay, and then once you do that, you just click, and that's it. Now you can keep offsetting something a bunch of times, but once we're done with that, we right click, hit enter or escape, and get out of the command. Okay, but offsetting is really, really useful tool, and you'll actually use quite often in drafting, because it's just a quicker way to replicate what you have at a set distance away. And so essentially what you're doing are you're copying it exactly that distance away. Now, like I mentioned, in ortho mode, when everything is perfectly either vertical or horizontal, copying something exactly a certain distance is the same as offsetting. But let's turn our ortho off and say I want to copy this line or offset this line 10 this way. Well, if I use copy, I'd have to not only know the distance, which is 10, but I need to know the exact angle to do that is perpendicular to this that I want to copy it to. Whereas if I use the offset command, again, we're just going to use 10, click it, and we can put it right over there. You see how that works, but it maintains a perpendicular orientation to the initial object. Okay, so that's very helpful. Okay, so a couple other commands I'm going to go over real quickly are the extend and trim commands. So first we're going to do extend, and this kind of is a good setup for that. So we see these lines here, and let's just say, for example, we wanted these to connect to each other at this angle, but we want to figure out how they connect to each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type EX for extend, and then now it tells me select objects. So let's just say I want this one and this one to touch together. And when I say extend, I'm basically saying I want this line to maintain its exact angle, but just continue on until it hits this line. Okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click this line up here. And the reason I'm doing this, even though I want to extend this line, what you do is you essentially tell the program where do you want it to go when you're extending something. And so I want this line to go up here. So I select that, right click. Now it says select the object to extend. Okay, so now that's this one, and when I hover over it, it automatically shoots it up there. Okay, now in old AutoCAD, you wouldn't be able to do that unless this line went all the way across and it could physically touch this line. Nowadays you can extend it to essentially the continuation of this line. But if we wanted these two to touch, we could just do this in reverse, and we extend again where we want to go first, and then now the object we want to go there second, and now they can touch. So a quicker way to do that would be to, again, I'm right clicking and repeat extend, and if we click both of them at the same time, now let's say we do this one first, see how it just pops a little bit, and then we can go ahead and extend that one. You see how that works. So now let's just say I want to actually extend all these lines but up to here. So I'm going to click here and just extend all of them. Okay, I'm just going to get rid of these. Alright, so that's an easy way to move. So if you had a gap you needed to, or if you had a situation where you had to move a road over, move a line over, but to fill that gap I wanted to keep this consistent, so you just extend it over to there. So essentially the opposite type command to extend is trimming. So if you see these little where the line sticks out between these two, so say if I wanted to keep this same format where they're clipped right nice together at an angle, it's already sticking too far out this way and too far out that way. What I can do is essentially use the trim command, and they have scissors, which is appropriate, to basically cut the ends off and make it perfect with that corner. So to do that, I type the TR, which is trim, hit enter, and now it says to select objects. So the way the trim command works is you have to select essentially what is going to be your scissors. Okay, so let's just say I want to cut the end of this one off. So from here to here, I want to cut that off even with this line. So instead of clicking this one, that is the object I want to cut, but I need to select essentially what the scissors are going to be. So I'm going to select this line, hit enter, and now I want to select the object to trim, which is this one. And so we see the second I hover over it, it shows what it would look like if it's gone away. And now I can click and it's gone. Okay, so I can do the same thing over here with this line and clip that end. Okay, so this is where you really have to focus and understand the commands and learn looking at the command line for what it's actually saying. Extend and trim are two commands people often get backwards because they want to select the thing, the object they are looking to trim or to extend first, whereas you actually have to select in the extend, you select the destination first, then the object you want to extend. Same thing with trim, you select the cutting edge or the scissors first, then the object. Now you can actually do two at a time. So if we wanted to say, let's take these both out. If we selected with our window and we clicked both of them, now right click. So now essentially we have scissors in both directions. Now this is where you have to be careful though, because scissors can cut a line two different ways. It can cut this little end off like we want, or it can cut this side off. Okay, so we just want to cut the ends, but now we can click that end and that end and we're done. So let me just do this one more time here and cut this end off. But I want to show you another way. Say we wanted to keep this line, but just the part on the inside between these two lines. So let's think about how we could do that. So let's say we want to keep this line up to this point, take this out, keep this, and take this part out. Now we need to think of what our cutting edges would be. We're going to repeat trim. So what I want to do is first I want to take this part out. So I'm going to select that as my cutting edge, and I can just do that right away. And I can just nip that one right off. But how do I take this off and keep it? Now I can click this line now, but it can either take that end off or it can take this whole line off. But I don't want to take this whole line, I just want to take the middle part. So what I actually have to do in this scenario is use two cutting edges. So I'm going to cut both ends, and that way it cuts the line here and it cuts the line there. And see, now it only takes out the middle. And so those are some basic commands to kind of get you moving. Those are very helpful for a lot of modifying, specifically of lines, but any objects. Those are going to be the most common things you will use as you're drafting as far as the basic modification tools. So that's it for this video. The next one we will cover being more specific, so snapping with our lines, and get into kind of lines versus polylines and what the distinction of there is. Thanks.